is go to our final presentation of the day. So our presentation is actually going to cover insights around the Canadian media usage trends. And to start, we're going to have Matt Devlin from PhD give us a little bit of an update on what that MUST report is all about. And that will be followed by a panel discussion with Laura Main, Carolyn Tabensi and RJ Poloski. And I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Lucy. Let's see if I can do better with this Canadian media usage study. I've practiced that a lot. So CMUST, or the Canadian Media Usage Study, is actually an annual report that PhD has been producing in partnership with the IAB since 2004. And what we do in this report is we compile data from all kinds of syndicated research and studies to try and give ourselves, our clients, and the industry a total picture of how Canadians are using media. And it's funny, it started initially back in 2004 because there was really limited digital data. And it was important to compile lots of different perspectives to see the whole. And it kind of feels like in a lot of ways, we're back to that again today. We are a couple of weeks away from the point in the year where that data converges and we really lean into building the story for the end of November. And what I thought I would do today is spend 10 minutes talking about 3 trends that we think are really important in media that are having an impact on marketing effectiveness. These are trends that we looked at a little bit last year in CMUST, and we're going to be coming back to in some form this year as well. And they are the need to fund digital availability, fragmented attention, and multifaceted inflation. And actually, these trends are going to fit pretty nicely into some of the content you've already seen today. So the first is funding digital availability. I'm sure that we are all involved in some form of putting brands out into the digital world with brand websites or presence on retailer websites and so on. Really, the notion of digital availability is to acknowledge the work of Byron Sharp and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, and how there is mental availability, which we've just heard about from Jeff and Rachel. And then there's physical availability. So on the one hand, it's about coming to mind when a consumer is having your brand come to mind when a consumer is entering the category. That's mental availability, and it's significantly driven by advertising. And then you've got physical availability, which is like literally being to hand when somebody is ready to buy. And I think it's important to start acknowledging that there is a major cost for many marketers, and it's called digital availability. It's not, it's somewhere in between physical availability and mental availability. It's about investing in being in the path to purchase on digital websites, but also increasingly paid media. There was a really interesting article by a woman called Grace Kite. She's an econometrician in the UK. I highly recommend her. She publishes pretty regularly on Marketing Week. And what she did was to point out that there are 2 roles of online advertising, and one is really about that sort of path to purchase, what she calls signposting. And not only that, when you look at the trends over time, signposting has probably been a major driver of digital advertising's growth. What she pointed out was the digital share of advertising in the UK was very much correlated to e-commerce's share of retail. The lines sit pretty much on top of each other. And that's what you're seeing in this graph here. This is Canadian data. The trend holds true for the US as well. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is a kind of bifurcation. E-commerce has obviously grown dramatically in terms of our share of retail. And our best estimates at the moment would be digital share of advertising has also grown, but it's kind of reached a limit. If we stayed on that trend over the last 6 years, what would have happened is digital share of advertising would actually have exceeded total advertising overall. And the implication here, I think, is many marketers are caught between doing a disservice to 2 types of objectives at the same time. The need to fully fund digital availability while also maintaining some investment on mental availability. And I think that marketers that can crack this by really understanding which elements of digital are working hard and which are sort of superfluous, while also investing in digital availability. If you can get that balance right, you're going to see a lot of success. The next thing is fragmented attention. Obviously, this is not a new topic, but there has been an acceleration. So what you're going to see here is a sort of map of Canadian media usage. The vertical axis is the percentage of adults 18 plus who are using a medium in a given week. And then the horizontal axis is the weekly hours. In 2001, ages ago, TV was top medium, 96% reach, 25 hours a week. Radio was almost as big. Print media like newspaper and magazines were consumed by almost around 80% of the population. And the internet was used by the sort of nerdier half of the population. In the intervening 18 years to 2019, what you see is really not much of a drop in terms of television, a little bit less reach, a little bit less time spent. Radio saw some declines. Print of both types saw major drops, in significant part because you don't need a magazine or a newspaper to tell you what's on television anymore. And obviously the internet grew hugely and it became the #1 medium. What I'm going to show you next is the next 3 years and how that how trends have evolved at an increasing pace. So what you see is TV, which was really quite stable, continues to be big. It's at least 90% of the population is watching at least a little bit of television in a week. But there's been more declines in the last 3 years than in the previous 18. And you can see that drop, that kind of COVID drop, where there's a bigger space between those two dots. Radio is pretty stable in spite of less out-of-home tuning. And newspaper seems to have stabilized a little bit, and magazines have continued to decline. But I think maybe the most interesting thing, and we started watching this last year and it's only accelerated, is as best as we can tell, and it's really hard to get a full measure on this, but as best as we can tell, time spent with the internet on desktop, laptop, and mobile looks as though it's in decline year on year, 2 years in a row. Now that seems counterintuitive, but what we are also seeing is a lot of growth in smart televisions. The penetration of smart TVs up a lot, and the subscription services, I think we've all experienced, have dramatically improved. And so the hypothesis, and it's pretty hard to prove this with data, but it makes sense, is that some of that digital time is being eaten up with the device on the wall. And that has some interesting implications in terms of measurement, audience targeting, and so on. It also means that there's kind of increasing openness to subscriptions. What you see with this pie chart is the average adult 18 plus video consumption time. So about half of the video consumption time of all adults is in linear television. About a quarter of it is on some form of connected television, smart TV, and about a quarter of it on mobile, desktop, and laptop. And when you kind of overlay the proportion of those times that are dedicated to subscription services, what you land on is that amongst all adults, only about 70% of media time is ad funded. And amongst younger adults, the story's more severe. They spend a significant proportion of their time on looking at a television, almost as much, but they're much more likely to be adopting the connected TV, smart TV services. And as a result, only about half the time of adults 18 to 34 is ad funded, 54%. And so attention is becoming much more fragmented in terms of a marketer's ability to reach it. More platforms, more ways of measuring, more types of creative. And that's creating a lot of complexity that simply didn't exist before. And that is one of the contributing factors, both of those two trends actually, to what we're calling multifaceted inflation. Those of you who have been entering the TV market this fall, it won't be news that there is significant inflation in TV. It's being partly driven by a kind of unequal erosion of TV audiences. So what you see on that graph is 4 different audiences, English Canada, and the amount of time they are spending with television over a 5-year period. And younger audiences, no news, have turned away from television more than older audiences. Adults 55 plus have stuck with it. The implication is right now, advertisers are coming back to television because they're ready to invest, but audiences have fallen, especially younger audiences. So there's a supply issue. It actually takes twice as many GRPs now to reach half the population as it did sort of 2 or 3 years ago. And that is causing two types of inflation in TV alone. One is your cost per points are increasing, and those cost per points are delivering a little bit less reach. The very sensible thing to do is to take some of that TV investment and start to diversify into other channels. And there's definitely some benefits to that. You should absolutely be doing that. And you should also be conscious that attention is less available in other channels. There's some great research coming out of the UK by a company called Lumen, and there's a couple of others around that are doing similar work, looking at the amount of time on average individual ad vehicles carry people's attention. And what you can see is a pretty significant dropping off from TV into YouTube and presumably other forms of online video, and into the more static forms of advertising on the right. In some markets, this makes online video really pretty competitive with television, but actually relative to many markets that your peers may be working in, TV on a cost per attentive basis remains more cost efficient in most cases, particularly if you have a broad audience. And so there's another layer of inflation going on here, which is an increased cost as you diversify your investment across these different channels, of the sort of unit cost of gaining some attention. So what we are seeing is that marketers are managing some significant inflationary pressures, whether you're fully aware of them or not. You've got higher TV costs, you've got a higher price of attention in digital. And I think it's fair to be said that you have more jobs to be done that need to fund digital availability, or at least navigate around it, is potentially hugely disruptive to the media landscape, which I guess is another way of saying what Ian was saying earlier. The good thing is everybody is facing these pressures. It's a category truth. And there are ways to adapt it. So really knowing who you need to reach in order to grow your business, and planning for reach and attention it will be really useful. So at PhD, one of the things we've done is, we've got a multi-channel reach planner, and we've programmed in some of that attention research so that we can help navigate that a little bit. Stronger creative is becoming a kind of a common talking point around the need to apply that sort of 95-5 rule to the types of ways that you're communicating with people. And then finally, better measurement, looking critically at the data in front of you and asking your agencies to do the same, both in terms of the audience and especially in terms of the impact, and ideally both in the short and long. So there's a lot of areas to maneuver. The marketers that manage these inflationary pressures are going to get a significant advantage as it relates to advertising. And with that, I'm going to just wrap it up. These were the three things we talked about: funding digital availability, fragmented attention, and multifaceted inflation. And I'll wrap up the presentation and turn to our panel. I'm really excited about this group. We've had a couple of introductory chats, and they've got some really interesting perspective from different points of view. So we're joined by Carolyn, RJ, and Laura. I'm particularly excited to have Carolyn here from the APTN. The APTN has been a really useful resource for me, and it's an integral part of the gradual progress we are making towards truth and reconciliation. The APTN's reporting has been a critical source of information on revelations about residential schools, as well as shedding light on enduring systemic inequities in child welfare and beyond. And their support of Indigenous content is an important part of protecting and nurturing the diversity of Indigenous perspectives in Canada. Carolyn, thanks for making the time for this today. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and APTN?
Sure. Thanks so much, Matt. It's been a big week for us, for sure. Yesterday being the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And so thank you very much for your words in terms of the stories that we share. I'd like to recognize I'm in Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'm Executive Director here at APTN of Marketing and Communications. I've been here since 2018, and I've been in marketing communications for over 30 years. For those of you who may not be aware of APTN, we are the first national Indigenous broadcaster in the world. And we share or we provide programming by, for, and about Indigenous peoples to share with all of Canada. So really proud of the work that we do here, and happy to be here on the panel.
Thanks, Carolyn. RJ, thanks for joining us. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and TEEDS?
RJ, you're on mute.
Here we go. My name is RJ Pulaski. I'm the managing director for TEEDS Canada. TEEDS connects brands with really great publications. We are the world's single largest platform to connect brands to world-class tier 1 publications and really high impact, effective advertising on them. Really happy to be part of the conversation today. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, RJ. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself in Quantcast?
You bet. Laura Main, Managing Director at Quantcast. Been with Quantcast for about 3 years, but really immersed in the digital marketing industry for the past 12. Just a bit about Quantcast. So we are creators of a new and really intelligent audience platform. It lets brands and agencies and publishers really intimately know and then grow their audience, sort of, with the idea of reaching the right people at the right place at the right time. And our tech is just a combination of a really robust data pool. It spans across the entire open internet, and then a really sophisticated behavioral and interest analysis at the targeting platform. So for us, and like very consistent with this conversation, we work really closely with brands to drive both brand awareness and then outcome focused marketing.
Cool. Thanks. So in our kind of warm-up session, we talked a little bit about the tension that marketers are feeling between path to purchase or digital availability type investments and leaning more into the brand. And, I think it'd be neat to hear your perspectives about where you think we are now and where we think we're going. RJ, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So I think, classically, we've all been trained as marketers that the way we should be investing is 60% of our dollars should go to be building brand, with 40% of our dollars and efforts going towards activation. So, moving product off a shelf at the end of the day, if you will. I think over the last, 20 months since the pandemic, we've really seen the pendulum swing into an era where we're seeing a lot more investment going into activation, moving products, than we've seen historically. And I think it's going to be an interesting exercise as we emerge from the last 2 years into maybe hopefully a non-pandemic future, if you will, looking back at seeing if some of these investment decisions actually have made sense and have paid off the way we've expected to. I think e-commerce makes that pendulum swing a little bit easier and probably a little bit more seductive, because we think we can be closer to the consumer from a from a shopping cart perspective or actual conversion perspective through digital channels. But I've definitely seen a shift, and I'm going to be definitely curious to see what the business impact is as we start to do some of the post-pandemic analysis on how businesses have evolved.
Yeah. Laura, Quantcast has some approaches that maybe you can just tell us about how you guys fit into this picture.
Yeah. And I also I want to agree. I think we've seen this really accelerated shift to streaming video, online shopping, curbside pickup. And I kind of joke, if you're anything like me, a lot of matching sweatsuits, and brands used to focus a lot more on building awareness and affinity. And that's the mental availability piece. But, again, RJ and everyone else on the call has been saying, there's this shift in how consumers are shopping. We've seen this huge push towards e-commerce. There's this focus on direct-to-consumer sales. I also think that there's, with this rapid shift, people have all of these choices at their fingertips. So it's actually, really important for brands to not forget about focusing on brand right now. So one of the things that we've done actually here is Quantcast, this is probably what you're talking about. We rolled out a tool called the Halo Report. So this lets brands see how their branding efforts are directly impacting their e-commerce or some activation efforts. So for example, we can paint a picture of what's the impact of connected television might be on a performance campaign. So what's the uplift metrics on something like ROAS, cart size, or acquisition efficiency. So, I think Rachel, in that last presentation, you kind of nailed it also. We know that brands want to see deliverables right now, but there is a huge importance on like building brand to bank for future cash flow. I love that. And then your closing point when you talked about, the biggest brands will have the most mental availability, and brand doesn't have to be unquantifiable, which I think we've thought it is in the past. It can be tracked, it can be measured. You guys are doing, LinkedIn's doing it, Quantcast is doing it, and so it can tie it to the bottom line. So I think there's a lot of cool things happening, but people shouldn't lose focus on the importance of brand.
Yeah, I think measurement has become synonymous with very granular last minute type tracking, but increasingly we're seeing the benefit of really understanding what's lifting brand and how brand lifts business in the long term. Carolyn, one of the ways that marketers are kind of getting around this fragmentation is to lean into purpose and to make a conscious effort towards diversity and equity and inclusion and that kind of thing. Are you seeing that manifest itself with the APTN? Are people coming to you more?
Definitely. I mean, it's been interesting in terms of just the last 18 months acknowledging social justice issues that are coming to the forefront. And it's probably North America's largest social movement that's been happening. And so, because of that, brands are certainly looking at, how are they sort of fitting in terms of diversity and representation in terms of that brand building for them. And so for us, it's put a big spotlight on us for our role in reaching our core audience. And so we have found over the last 18 months that more and more advertisers are coming to us and reaching out to us. We've always had a really difficult time because our measurement through Nielsen, it only captures in the measured markets about 14% of Indigenous people, but we know that almost half of Indigenous people are tuning into us every week and reaching us, and so we have sort of that disparity there. But so advertisers have to kind of balance that out. But for advertisers, really a thoughtful strategy of how they're going to approach brand in terms of diversity and making sure that they are authentic in their action is a big part of how advertisers and brands are looking at how to approach diverse markets.
I guess there's a risk that marketers and advertisers see leaning into diversity and inclusion as something that's really complicated. And I guess I was expecting that you might be having lots of conversations about making it easy for advertisers to be on board with APTN, but it actually sounds like it's not as complicated as that.
Yeah, I mean, Indigenous people consume all the same kinds of products. We've got national advertisers that don't have to promote different messages to our audiences, and really it's about a part of just breaking through and building that awareness of what they're offering.
One of the things we're seeing, and it's not news, but as audiences shift out of television and go into all kinds of different directions, advertisers and broadcasters and media sellers are having to adapt their strategies. And I think we've got an interesting perspective on this panel in terms of, RJ, maybe you could touch a little bit on how TEEDS can kind of play a role in that migration of dollars into brand building digital.
Certainly. The one lesson that we've learned is that creative really drives success when we're marketing, right? We know almost 2/3 of campaign performance are driven by creative decisions. Okay, so that's great. It means we need to build really intelligent creative that speaks to our customer, that inspires them, that motivates them, that gets our brand story across. But I think sometimes where we lose sight of when we're looking at multi-channel campaigns is that creative doesn't always live best on some channels, and sometimes it needs to be optimized to really sing in certain channels. So the great example might be you spend a lot of money on a beautiful television spot, 15-second, 30-second spot, whatever it may be. And it works really, really great on television. But when you put it onto your phone, all of a sudden you have a little screen and it maybe doesn't work for you in the same way. So how do you optimize that television spot to work really, really well in a mobile environment? How do you optimize your display to work really well in mobile versus display environments? And so what Teeds has done is we built a practice as a part of our business called Teeds Studio that really works with media, brand, and marketer and creative to sit around the table and say, okay, great, how do we take these assets and make them perform exceptionally well, depending on which environment they're actually being consumed by with a consumer. So it's making channel-specific optimization decisions for creative. And we find that really makes that investment that you've gone and done, for example, in your expensive TV spot, you get a lot more value and you get a lot more return on it because you've actually then been able to repurpose it for other channels. And so for us, we talk a lot about creative in our business. How do we optimize creative to make sure that it's working the best it can in each channel that it's being delivered and consumed by the consumer?
Carolyn, as a broadcaster, you're facing a challenge in that your revenue comes from broadcast, but that's not where your audience is necessarily these days. How does the ABTN manage that?
Well, I mean, we're not government funded, so our revenue primarily comes from subscribers of, I'll say, cable television, and then advertising revenue is a portion of that as well. So, but I think in terms of, we're advertisers too. And so our approach is also a blended mixed media approach of traditional, digital. You have to really follow the consumer where they are to try and reach them. And so it's that balancing act in terms of doing a combination of everything that I think builds the strongest plans.
One of the other types of fragmentation we're seeing is within digital. As cookies deprecate and iOS blocks tracking and so on, we're kind of getting channels within digital, and it maybe starts to pay to think about it that way. And some of the data we're seeing is that as channels become harder to track, the costs go down, and that may create opportunities for advertisers to kind of counteract some of those inflationary effects. Laura, that seemed to be a topic that you were leaning into. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think right now there's about a third of the population that is like across the internet that it's kind of non-addressable, and they're playing in this cookieless space. And, thank you for letting me talk to this one, because we did actually just roll out a cookieless solution. Basically what you can do is you can target an advertiser in a cookieless environment. This is actually huge because, this is where you have a monster amount of the population kind of playing. And so now you can kind of hit this addressable audience. I think I used the analogy during our warm-up session. It's like when Snapchat came onto the scene, and CPMs were low, people weren't playing in the space. And so if you're a brand and you want to test and see what kind of traction you can get right now, what kind of results, this is a really good time to test. So I'm getting a lot of feedback.
I think this is a really, really important point to make. As a marketer, nearly half of your customer base today is non-addressable through digital channels, which means you can't target them like you used to. Nearly half. So, what as a marketer are you going to do to ensure you can still have that conversation with your customer? Some of it's going to be channel decision, right? Like as I said, I think television is a very durable channel for marketers and needs to be looked at continually. In a digital world, how are you going to speak to these consumers? Companies like Laura have solutions for this, I just think it's crucially important because it's a big deal. 50%, 1 in 2.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like RJ, and you were talking about the pendulum. I also think it's swinging back to the days when individual publishers and networks kind of ruled the world. Like brands want to know where are they spending their money. They want to be confident that they're reaching audiences in really contextually relevant places. I was thinking about this the other day. Like you're Nike and you're targeting me with a cool shoe ad. Like I'm totally your target. But if you're targeting at me while I'm looking for stuff for my kids or how to make granola, which I can now do, I'm not in the right frame of mind, to notice your ads. So you've nailed your audience, but really not the actual context. So it's really important to find the balance between the two, for sure.
Yeah. I just lost my train of thought.
Oh,
I didn't, no, it wasn't you. I mean, I think that we're definitely seeing that tension between, we have, for the last couple of years, really been leaning into the power of audience data, and we've kind of lost track of the context a little bit. I think that some of the stuff that Lisa shared from Kantar was pretty thought-provoking. We probably knew it was true, but to start to see that shape up quantitatively was interesting. RJ, like I feel like this context piece is kind of integral to parts of what Tease does. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, we provide a platform for publishers to connect with brands, and predominantly we work with news and magazine editorial, written word, if you will, publishers. And the context you can gather within the written word is probably the most robust right now that you can do in a digital world. And so I think what we're going to observe with the challenges, that increasing challenges around addressability, is we're going to see a pivot back towards context. And when we think about context has been around in our business since the beginning, right? You think about the world of, Publishers Clearinghouse, where there was thousands of magazines you could choose to market in, and there was a group of fishing magazines that you could sell fishing lures in if that was your business. We saw the evolution of that in the television in the early 2000s with specialty networks, right, where we had this proliferation of very specific content around and broadcast. We saw that online in the early days. And I think we're going to see a swing back to that now, where marketers are going to start to rethink around, okay, let's think about context, not just about individual one-to-one addressability, but what's the environment? Again, this is why I think broadcast is durable as well. What's the environment? What's the context? And how do we want to speak to our consumer to build brand in that manner, and then also around activation piece. I mean, there's a whole, I think, separate conversation around measurement that we can have, but I think context is going to become increasingly important as some of this addressability challenges wash through our industry overall.
Laura, are you buying that too?
Yeah, I mean, I buy it. We actually, just to sort of recently rolled out something called Publisher Connect. So this lets brands kind of create segments. And so, publishers create segments, and then brands can attach themselves to that. So we can facilitate direct to publishers buys. So, to go back to my Nike example, if I'm reading about fashion, I'm getting back into post-pandemic shape, or what the celebrities are wearing right now, I'm in a perfect frame of mind to look at an ad about shoes. And so I think it's really important, exactly what RJ is saying, is to find that marriage between content and context.
Yeah, the scale of the challenge is pretty daunting. As like someone who I work at one of the biggest media, well, probably the biggest media buyer in the country, and the challenge of going out and finding, rediscovering what content means again, I think is pretty daunting, but also kind of exciting. I think that there is all kinds of opportunity for creativity in that space, and I think that marketers that are able to get this balance right between following the path to purchase and also getting the context right, being in environments that people actually care about, like the APTN, and making that kind of brand connection. There's a secret sauce out there that could be really, really powerful.
Just to add to that, I've always said that media strategy is always an art and a science. And it's so, you look at the data, but when you're talking about, how RJ and Laura mentioned context, and there's that intuitiveness that, media planners have to take into account to understand how to connect with consumers. And that's not always in a number. And efficiencies, there's just that intuition in terms of how to find the right people to present your product to.
Yeah, the numbers can sometimes be seductive, right? We get focused on measuring things because they're measurable and not necessarily because they're meaningful, and I think there's an important distinction there. If our job at the end of the day as a marketer is to sell shampoo, what matters is how much shampoo we're selling. Not what the click-through rate on our ad is, or what the viewability rate or completion rate is on a video. It's, are we selling shampoo? And I think sometimes it's seductive to really sort of nerd out on the spreadsheets and numbers when we need a little bit of that art put into it, and a little bit of that context around, is this really meaningful on our business and our business results, that we're trying to affect through marketing at the end of the day.
Yeah. One of the things I've been finding recently is how much art there is to the measurement side too. So I want to thank you all for participating. I've found this process journey with you coming to this really cool. Totally different ends of the industry with a lot of shared perspective and wisdom. I want to just hand it over to each of you if you have any points you want to hit or any advice you want to give to marketers as they're facing the year ahead. Laura, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, when a lot of brands are really focused on the in-cart dollars and right now, but there's so many smart new products that are coming onto the scene. So we just, don't lose your focus on sort of building that affinity in market. I think measurement can play a really important aspect in doing that and helping make really smart and informed decisions. And so I think you just need to be able to find that balance.
Thanks, Laura. RJ?
I will say we're heading into Q4, which is always one of the most exciting times of the year for businesses and marketers and consumers, believe it or not, as well. And so I just wish everyone a really fantastic Q4. Thank you to the CMA and all the other presenters for having us. And if you want to know more about TEEDS, feel free to reach out. Happy to chat anytime. Thank you.
Carolyn.
Thank you, Matt, for bringing this and all of us together to the table in the CMA. From my perspective, I know that the pendulum has swung and digital is super important, and it is, but really just recognizing, and as your research shows, that there's still lots of value in traditional advertising and television, and for marketers to just think big picture and look at all aspects of how everything sort of has to hit on the mark to reach our consumers. So, but thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you. And with that, I guess I will hand back to Lucy to wrap us up for the day and into the Q&A. Perfect.
Great. Thank you, guys. What a great discussion. Thank you, RJ, Laura, Matt, and Carolyn for that discussion. Fantastic. We're going to move into the Q&A, but right before we do, I just really want to do one more big virtual applause to our sponsors, Kantar, LinkedIn, Loblaw Media, Quantcast, and TEEDS. So thank you very much. So what we're going to do next is bring everybody back. So let's bring back Rachel and Ian, if we can, and get everybody on screen. And Jeff, there we go. We've got everybody. Perfect. Ian, there we go. Got everybody back. So I guess a couple of questions have come in, and let's see. I think the first question is for Lisa. So Lisa, when you were talking about the RMB strategy around reach, messaging, and brand building, the broader reach part, does that go against the theory of hyper-targeting?
Sorry, that was for me?
Yeah.
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry, I missed the question.
I was just the question general. Basically, does the RMB strategy that you shared from the research, is that more about, does that sort of go against the theory of hyper-targeting in media?
I think this might be for Rachel.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
I think this might be for me. Frankly, yes. So our team at the B2B Institute is definitely not a fan of hyper-targeting. We have a whole slew of material on why you should not hyper-target, and we actually think it's more so you can't hyper-target, you wouldn't hyper-target, you shouldn't hyper-target. And a big thing that we talk about is the can't piece. We actually have a whole trend on our library called the Subprime Data Crisis. I definitely recommend giving it a read. And it's really about how a lot of the third-party data that people are using, or I guess you could say were using in this pre-cookieless future, was really just low quality, very inaccurate data. And that was pretty much what was driving a lot of the hyper-targeting that was happening in B2B marketing. And even today, we say, yes, you can't really accurately hyper-target, but even if you could, you should not want to, simply because we are reach maximalists, and we do believe that brand marketing is much more effective when done at scale.
Okay, great. So, so specifically in the B2B space. Okay, got it. So the question for you, Lisa, I've got it this time. And I can actually say the word usage. Just wanted to get that clear right now. So Lisa, the question for you, when you're showing the rankings of the top media companies, and you're showing global, and then you showed local for Canada with Globe and Mail and TSN and everything. Did you have any results that didn't ask Canadians about local, just in generic media?
So this is a question I can answer.
Okay.
So we asked the global brands to all of the markets that we measured. And then we asked both the global and the local brands in every local market. So TikTok, which ranked #1 globally, did rank #6 in Canada. So we do have where all the global brands rank within our Canadian rankings. But I guess the takeaway there, or the interesting piece, was among all of those huge global brands, our Canadian brands still rose to the top.
Great. Perfect. Great. So one of the questions that came up from the audience is, let's see, how do you find consumer expectations have changed through the pandemic? So that's kind of a broad question. I guess maybe RJ, are you seeing some of that in terms of consumer expectations?
I would say yes, they've changed since the pandemic. I think they've changed across pretty much every aspect of a consumer's life, right? How we shop has expectations, how we shop has changed. Expectations on how brands speak to us change. Expectations on how products and services and delivered has changed. So I think, yes, consumer expectations have changed. I think consumers have become more demanding. I think consumers expect a lot more from brands, not only for safety, but for service and delivery and so on. So it's definitely, I think, a new paradigm around consumer expectations, and as a brand can be challenging. I think it's a pretty exciting opportunity to really engineer some of that consumer engagement, consumer touch points as well.
Great, thanks. Laura, you're nodding. Do you have something to add there?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything. I think I may have mentioned this, but like there's shortages. So consumers want things and they want them now. Like if I can't get delivery tomorrow, I'm probably going to look at another product probably quickly. So my loyalty is a little bit more diminished than it used to be. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the market right now for brands.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have an anonymous question that came up. Again, a generic one. Who do you think is making the greatest advancements in media, and how are they doing it? Matt, probably a good one for you.
I was hoping you were going to ask me that. I'm not sure I'm allowed to pick sides.
You don't want to pick sides. Okay. How about we throw that question to Ian?
Sure. I mean, the obvious answer, of course, is retail media networks. We're all over everything. But yeah, I think that obviously the biggest challenge I think that we're facing right now has been outlined a couple of times, that lack of addressability and that change in the paradigm of how we're going to be reaching customers and how we're going to measure. And it's huge. And it's just been kind of punted down the road, I think, for many years now. Even the status quo that people talk about, the death of cookies, whatever, it's still a very flawed process as it is now. So I think that, that's going to be the biggest challenge. So whoever's going to be able to solve that is going to do the best job of it. But I think really what we'll see, though, I mean, and this is something you talked about, Laura, too, it's something we're very well positioned to do as well, is creating that direct connection between a brand and the publisher, right? Like, fewer intermediaries, being able to make that deal directly with them, addressing common audiences in a way that makes sense and really develops that relationship.
Perfect.
I wouldn't mind giving a plug for actually to one of our clients, because I think that they've done this in a really interesting way. So Scotiabank leaned into, they needed to grow demand among small businesses. And also they wanted to reflect the fact that the pandemic was disrupting everybody's small business. And they did this kind of leaning into a very broad approach, reaching small businesses by targeting consumers, but paired up with Rogers and very much focused on local media. And it's a campaign that's called Operation Support Local. And you'll see it come up in award shows in Canada and beyond. It's getting a fair amount of recognition. And I think what was brilliant about it is it went super mass. It paired very closely with strong media brands, strong local media brands. And the messaging really was on that 95 that were not in market. It was not about reaching people who were looking to open a small business account, but we can see the effects in the upward trends and demands for Scotiabank. So I think the ones that the marketers and the media sellers that will really succeed out of this pandemic won't be afraid of kind of flipping perspective and taking a new approach to how they tackle the challenges ahead of them.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think we have to wrap it up. We've just run out of time. So thank you everybody for participating. And I just want to remind everybody that you will receive in the post-event email or recording of this event copies of the available presentations and a short survey. So I would really appreciate if you take some time to fill out that survey. Now, before we conclude our meeting, we'll be moving to the virtual networking session for the next 15 minutes. You'll have the opportunity to meet speakers, attendees, one-on-one capacity. Everybody gets 2 minutes. It's like speed networking, speed dating. You'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, some handshaking where it says networking. As soon as you click on that, you'll be thrown into it. And after 15 minutes, the event is now over. So again, thank you to everybody out there for joining us. Head into the networking. Everybody out there, please stay safe. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.